Britain today is suffering the longest peacetime slump in decades. Almost a quarter of young people are out of work.
It ruins your confidence, just trying and trying.
There is no hope for them. There's no hope of opportunities. There are no hope of employment.
A Panorama survey suggests we have little confidence in our leaders' ability to get us out of trouble. Millions of ordinary people now feel economically squeezed.
Fuel, food, everything else keeps increasing. That challenge is going to get harder and harder, and you're going to run out of options.
We've been here before. The last double-dip recession was in the mid-70s. That led to social unrest and political upheaval. But are all the ingredients here for a similar reaction?
If we don't find solutions, they could have very large social ramifications, and not very nice ones.
With many predicting the worst is still to come, tonight Panorama asks whether Britain is ready and able to cope with a new age of austerity. Times are tough. People worry that we're facing a dismal future. No growth, high unemployment, deep cuts, and little hope. Clapham, southwest London. For most of the past 100 years or so, this has been home to the ordinary man on the street. Average income, average house price, average lifestyle. Home to the man on the so-called Clapham omnibus. So how's the ordinary man on the Clapham omnibus going to cope with the financial and economic challenges we're facing today? Well, he's been here before.
Tickets, please.
Return to the 1970s, please. The 1970s began with such hope, but ended with strikes, crippling public finances and soaring prices. It resulted in a political and economic revolution and massive social upheaval.
The land of hope and glory has become the land of beg and borrow.
It's told like that, that's ruining this country. We're not a sinking ship.
Of course we're a sinking. This country gets more like the boiler room of the Titanic every day. Confused orders from the bridge, water swirling round our ankles. The only difference is they had a band.
On the surface, we've come a long way from the dark days of the 70s. But could today's crisis destabilise the country in a similar way? Well, it's already having a severe impact on the lives of many ordinary people. Hayley Gay is a single working mum living in South London. She's juggling her role as a school administrator and bringing up her two children.
The situation is you get your wages that come in once a month, you then have to budget that across the time. The fuel bills, for instance, whether it be your energy, electricity and gas and all sorts, or whether it be car bills, are just spiralling out of control. We either buy food or we buy school shoes, but sometimes the school shoes have to be bought, and therefore you downgrade in some of the food.
It does strike me as odd that a very advanced, developed country like the UK places ordinary working people like you in a situation where you have to decide between buying shoes for your kids to go to school or buying food. It becomes a decision
sometimes,
as bleak and as obvious as that.
It definitely feels that way.
But Hayley's circumstances are not exceptional. 1 in 5 UK families admit they are now financially living on the edge.
I do feel that we do have to economise on everything we do. Any parent would always make sure their child was fed, looked after and all sorts, and therefore I would basically not eat as well necessarily, so that they could have the things that they should be provided with.
One of the big financial strains for ordinary working people is the cost of housing. Back in the 70s, Clapham was seen as the stereotypical home of the average man, the man on the Clapham omnibus. And there was good reason for that. Houses and rents were far more affordable. Clapham was a place where working class people grew up. People like actor Neil Pearson.
I know it was a fairly close-knit community because I did seem to know pretty much everyone who lived on the street.
When Neil was growing up on this street, living conditions were often poor and dilapidated, the kind we thought we'd left behind in the archives of the 70s sitcom.
Good Lord! Yes, well, I know it's not exactly 5-star, Mr. Gray, but it is rather short notice.
There's water running down the walls.
Don't you expect champagne?
Your house is what, just round the corner?
No, it's just on the corner.
It's on the corner?
Yeah, it's
the white one?
The one with the very royalist Union Jack.
OK. This 2-bedroom flat was home to Neil, his brother and sister, and his mother. All 3 children shared 1 bedroom, and there was no bathroom, just a tin bath put on the sitting room floor.
OK, this is as I remember it. This is the kitchen. This is the living room, also unchanged. This is pretty much as it was. I haven't been in here for 42 years. It's a little overwhelming.
Yvonne Hunt and her husband have rented the flat since Neil's family moved out 40 years ago. While inside has remained remarkably unmodernised, outside the front door, it's now a very different world.
Do you recognise much of Taybridge Road or Clapham as a whole from those times, or do you feel that you're a lone remnant of that period?
Yeah. More people with a bit more money, and sort of the people that we know either died or they've moved on.
Yvonne is one of the last survivors of a class which is no longer living on streets like this. It was solidly what we would see now as working class when you grew up. This was a solid working class area, wasn't it?
I wouldn't have articulated it like that at the time, obviously, but I recognised everyone I interacted with as being like me. And it was monolithically one class then. And I think it's probably also monolithically one class now. It's just a different class.
The middle classes moved in and gentrified the area, but the rise of financial services as the new engine of Britain's economy brought in an even wealthier class.
Bloody yuppies. There's so much pushing the rents up. These houses was £5 a week rent once. I could afford to own in them days. Not now, though. Not these days.
So what sort of people could buy a house here now?
Today, it'll be bankers. Flavour of the month, obviously. It'll definitely be bankers, it'll be stockbrokers, it'll be accountants, it'll be lawyers. It is a fact. If a house costs £1 million, you've got to be pretty well paid or independently wealthy to afford it.
These price tags have put Clapham beyond the dreams of the ordinary man on the Clapham omnibus. In the 70s, average house prices were 3 times earnings. Now it's over 5 times. In London, it's a lot worse than that. Pricing people out of their traditional neighbourhoods has made many working families feel increasingly marginalised.
The discrepancy between house prices and wages is so great now compared to where it was in the 70s when these things were actually affordable and achievable. And we're now coming to a point where that isn't the case, and aspiration therefore starts to fall back. And once aspiration starts to go, hope disappears.
For ordinary working professionals, getting the keys to a family-sized home can now involve moving many miles and hours from your place of work. It's a move the Pilditch family felt forced to make, leaving their Clapham flat behind for a house 60 miles away in rural Berkshire.
We needed to put our roots down and purchase, get on the ladder. I think we could have probably done a tiny little flat, maybe a 2-bed flat.
For the money we could afford to spend, you'd get a pretty small shoebox.
Now, Justin, a website designer, and Roseanne, who works as a personnel manager, each spend 3 hours a day commuting to and from work in London.
I think your 2 professions like lawyers or bankers or something, those are the people who perhaps can have the houses.
There's talk of this squeezed middle. Do you feel squeezed?
Yes, definitely. Your costs and expenses in life are going up, not least of which is the train fares and the electricity and everything else like that. But salaries aren't going up in the same way that they did 20 years ago.
Somewhere you've got to draw the balance between what you're going to eat, cut the meat out a bit, not completely. You've got growing children, you've got to balance their diets as well as ours. If fuel, food, everything else keeps increasing, that challenge is going to get harder and harder and you're going to run out of options.
The notion of a squeezed middle is more than just middle-class moaning. Average real earnings fell by over 3% in 2011, and that's the largest one-year fall for 30 years. Little wonder the government's just reversed its plans to raise duty on fuel. That squeeze is also felt in the falling amount of money we have in our pockets for essential weekly shopping. Although average inflation has been, well, relatively modest over the past few years, the cost of things we buy every single day has gone up dramatically. My daily cup of coffee, for instance, is around 30% more expensive than it was just 4 years ago, and that is around 2.5 times the rate of inflation. Tastes the same though. It's not just coffee. Over the past year or so, fuel and utility bills have rocketed. Gas is up 16%, the cost of childcare is up nearly 6%, and this while we're told that official inflation is just 2.8%. But what many notice the most is the rising cost of food. We've been here before as well.
Yesterday I went in the same shop near where I live. There were 7.5 for a tin of tomatoes. They've gone to 10.5. They were doing them like that as we walked in this morning. That's in the day's time.
In the 1970s, inflationary pressures were clear to everyone. But are they as clear today? We're at a nice fish stall here. Average price is up 3%. What do you think might have happened to the price of white fish? What would you say? Shout it out. What do you think? Gone up. Gone up. It's actually up 12%. So that is something like 4 times the actual rate of inflation. That's just the past year. What about over the last 4 years? What do you think might have happened to the price of rump steak over the past 4 years? 10%? 10%. It's worse than that. 15. 15%. It's worse than that. 18. 18%. It's worse than that. 22. 22%. And it's worse than that because over the past 4 years, the price of meat is up 26%. Despite the fact that the inflation rate is not up to the levels of the 70s, people are feeling the pinch. Poorer people spend a higher proportion of their income on basic products like food and fuel. Exactly the things which have gone up most.
There's a big difference between the general inflation rate and the rate at which the things we really need, things like food or housing or childcare, are becoming more expensive. And at the same time, their incomes are stagnant or sometimes going down. So you're trying to kind of pay for the same thing, you're paying more for it, and you've got less money to spend.
The lowest paid are the worst affected. Their pay fell by almost 5% between 2010 and 11. While so many are struggling, there's a growing feeling that the rich, by contrast, have never had it so good. In fact, the share of income of the top 1% doubled between the years 1970 and 2005. The highest earners often justify those kinds of rewards by claiming they're creating wealth for everyone, producing businesses, jobs, and money that would otherwise not be there.
It wasn't restraint that started the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't restraint that inspired us to explore for oil in the North Sea and bring it ashore. It was incentive. Positive positive, vital, driving, individual incentive.
Margaret Thatcher became leader of the Conservative Party in 1975, the last time the UK was in a double-dip recession. Her answer to that economic chaos was to release the full force of the free market.
We'll do it by letting profits rise to a level which offers a real incentive to expand.
One of the biggest long-term beneficiaries are the bankers and traders working in the city. Fund manager Crispin O'Day is one of the new class of Britain's super-rich. According to the Sunday Times Rich List, in 2010 he took home over £36 million.
Together we shall meet the crisis of this country, and tomorrow the day will be ours.
Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome. If you're wanting a vibrant economy, you are going to have winners and losers. We will only basically save ourselves if we start forgiving the bankers, because we've got to allow banking to be profitable. If banking is profitable, people will lend money. If people lend money, the economy will grow.
I mean, so you're saying it's actually good for the whole nation to have perhaps an elite group who are wealth creators, because they drag, in your view, they drag the whole of the nation up.
That's what I'm saying.
There's been no shortage of incentives for the top earners in recent years. It's a reward many feel is unpalatable, given others in the city are today accused of sharp practice and potential illegal behaviour. The wider question is whether the rewards at the top trickle down to the rest of the working population.
If you have an economic model which increasingly concentrates the fruits of that economy at the very top, then what happens is you effectively create consumer societies without the capacity to consume, and that's because you're cutting purchasing power.
Do you want a vibrant economy in which there is change and where there is improvement and there is a general sort of entrepreneurialism, in which case you're going to get these inequalities? Or do you want a much more stable society that might not move at all?
So you can either all be richer or you can all be more equal. You can't be both.
That's what I'm saying.
And in fact, the gap between rich and poor has grown faster in Britain than in any other developed country in recent decades.
We've done research that's looked into the future, looked to the year 2020, and what that's telling us is that gap's going to continue to get wider and wider.
The gap's even more obvious when times are tough, as in this recession. This is a rare sight today, a working coal mine. South Yorkshire was once synonymous with coal, but now the industry is all but dead. Hayley Taylor is amongst those trying to pick up the pieces.
Half a mile below the wet streets of Dennerby lies the seam of coal on which the town's poor fortunes are literally built.
There's over 1 million unemployed now, isn't there? So where else can we go? There's nothing else round it.
Pit villages like Stainforth grew up around Doncaster to service the mines. Once models of activity and industry, they are now among the worst unemployment black spots in the country.
OK, who's got a mobile phone on them? What's that mobile phone doing right now? Want it off.
Employment consultant Hayley Taylor is running a jobs workshop for young unemployed people. Almost a quarter of under 24-year-olds here are not in work, education or training.
You don't read the paper, right? How do you find a job in a paper if you don't read it?
Hayley finds that the youngsters she meets are ill-prepared for the harsh realities of today's employment market.
They don't understand what a CV is. They don't know how to apply for a job. It's never taught. What is required of them in work, what a national insurance card is for, what happens in the working world, what are the expectations of an employer from an employee.
Teresa is 17. She left school last year, but has so far failed to find work.
You don't believe in yourself. Why? What is there not to believe in?
I don't know, I've had experience, but when you've tried so much, it just, I don't know. makes you feel worthless and you're not going to get anywhere. Kind of makes you want to give up, but you don't want to because you want to get out there and you want to get a job.
For youngsters like Teresa and her friend Amy, prospects are bleak. The employment landscape is wholly different to what it was in the 70s.
It was an automatic assumption that all the guys that I was at school with would follow in their father's footsteps, which was to go and work in the mining industry. The girls, they were very much involved in wanting to work for the farm stores, which was packing food for supermarkets at that time. Whereas now, those openings don't exist because, you know, those industries, unfortunately, in Yorkshire have all gone.
Teresa may lack confidence, but she certainly doesn't lack determination. When you come into town to the job centre to look for work, you often can't afford the bus, can you?
No.
So you walk?
We walk.
How long is it?
It's like 6 or 7 miles.
Each way?
Here, yeah, each way.
It's a long walk.
Yeah, it's tiring. But it shows we're trying and we're not just sitting at home doing nothing. It shows we're actually up early and wanting to get out there and find a job.
In places like this, the journey back to work is not one that people can make without help. 20 years after the coal mining industry largely left the region, there is still nothing to replace it. It has therefore fallen to the public purse to support much of this community. A third of all jobs in Doncaster are in the public sector. Around a fifth of the working population are on benefits. How many jobs do you apply for?
A week, I would say about 12, 13.
Yeah. Is that
like
true?
2 a day?
Yeah.
You're not fussy about the jobs you take?
No,
just
anything.
Yeah.
You just get nothing. Like emails, we're either too young or unexperienced.
It ruins your confidence, just trying and trying.
And then just getting shut down.
And just getting it just feels like getting shut down.
There is talk about an actual lost generation of youth. Do you think that's accurate?
I think that's totally accurate. Their opinion is that there's no hope. There is no hope for them. There's no hope of opportunities. There are no hope of employment. There's no new business being created. You know, this is just an existence and not a life. And to hear that is so upsetting.
Though the latest figures show a slight drop in overall unemployment, more than 1 million under 24-year-olds are still out of work. That's 1 in 5, just down from its record high earlier this year. The consequences of cutting off a generation from work and opportunity could be severe.
Those people who are taking the biggest pain are people who've had no responsibility for this crisis. There is a danger of, you know, spreading social unrest and antagonism towards a society that seems to deny a significant proportion of the population decent opportunities and decent livelihoods.
Though the causes were complex and hotly debated, we caught a glimpse of what that kind of social unrest might look like last summer. In August last year, this corner of Clapham descended into chaos. The shops were looted, buildings burnt down, and pitched battles fought with the police. There were similar scenes in other city centres. More than 4,000 people were arrested. At times of crisis, we've traditionally turned to our political leaders, trusting they'll have the answers to pull us through. Today, that's no longer true. In a survey for Panorama, we found that over 2/3, 67% of the population, have little or no confidence in our politicians' ability to get us out of this economic crisis. Most of the country believe our political class are simply not up to the job. If you had to pick a word to describe the situation that we're all in now, what would that word be?
Quite angry in a lot of ways, because I think the way I see it is the people who are actually making the decisions for the country are people who are out of touch with the people who are actually at the bottom, who are actually suffering. And also a sense of not being able to change it. Not just being frustrated, but being...
helpless.
Helpless, yeah. Being helpless and just there is no end to it.
A lack of faith in politicians is only part of the problem. Today, there is an increasing sense that we are not all in this together. There are symbols of growing inequalities everywhere. Take our national game.
In the 1970s, footballers on the pitch felt much like the same people who were on the terraces. There was a continuity between the two. That simply doesn't exist anymore. Footballers have become so well paid that the connection between the supporters and the players has disappeared. Yeah.
Today you have to come down to football's lower leagues, to places like Brentford, to recapture the togetherness of the 70s, where supporters still feel they're living in the same world as the players they're watching.
There was a sense that we were, to coin a phrase, all in it together, that I think is going to be very difficult to recapture now, because I think people will look at the super rich, the elite in society and say, well, clearly we're not all in it together. There are things that have changed here.
Don't know how I'll get through. Ah, cheer up, could be worse. State this country's in, you could be free, couldn't you, right? Stuck outside with no work and a crumbling economy. Well, how horrible that'll be.
The visibly growing gap in inequality in society is adding to a sense of tension and anger. Even those who have benefited the most in recent years agree that their advancement has caused a sense of frustration.
I think that when the train stops, like it stopped, it's then that everybody starts to say who's in first class and who's in second class, and basically let's storm the first class.
The disadvantaged feel increasingly lost and isolated.
The gap has widened between those who have and those who have not. People just don't know where to go. Every time they turn around, there's more money been taken off of them and more charge been put on them.
One of the fears about the country is that there's a sort of what they're calling a lost generation. Do you feel lost?
Yeah, without a job's mainly all I want. Just to get out there and to do something every day.
At the end of the 1970s, Britain found an answer to the economic chaos by identifying the unions as a common enemy and turning to the free market instead. This time, it seems, we have a new common enemy: city bankers. But unlike the 70s, there's no obvious radical alternative. Even though the sense of frustration and anger which led to such huge change back then is once again knocking on our door. Next week, Panorama is on the trail of some of Britain's biggest illegal fly tippers, criminals who pocketed tens of thousands of pounds paid out by motorists to recycle their used tyres and protect the environment.
You take the face dusted, Stevie, right?
He's standing for mayor, but his past threatens to drag him down. BBC One's edgy thriller Blackout continues next, while BBC Three follows 3 people involved in last summer's violence. Riots, the aftershock, just starting.